Good evening. If you have a mobile, if you'd like to put it on silent, please, thank you. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome Piers Corbyn with Climate Policy Controls You, Not the Climate. Scientist Piers Corbyn, who is name dropper Jeremy's brother. No. Yeah. Tonight effectively shoots down the anthropogenic global warming, now retitled Climate Change, exposing the lie that it is. The movement that carries more emotional weight than the average Western teenager carries physical weight, Extinction Rebellion, appearing Piers' crosshairs for the exposure that it deserves. The girl who sees invisible gas may get a mention, and as does Brexit, or not, as the case may be. Piers runs weatheraction.com. It's a forecasting service that outperforms many of its competitors, if not all.
All of them.
All of them. Easy. Used by farmers, seafarers, mountaineers, civil engineering industry, and more. Do check it out. Please welcome Piers Corbyn.
Well, thank you very much, Rob. It's really good to be here. It's well, New Horizons is the place where you get quality productions and quality people, of course, listening. And as you mentioned, my brother, he used to be my brother, now I'm his brother, as I told you before. And we are in the most trying times politically since the end of the Second World War, I would say. But whatever, my view is a no-deal Brexit is basically the best thing that could happen. And, well, since we're getting nearer October the 31st, perhaps it is getting closer. Yeah. Anyway, if so, that's good. If not, ongoing chaos. I think, though, since we're just mentioning that, it's worth noting that Extinction Rebellion suddenly hit the headlines at the same time as people ought to have been looking at details of any Brexit stuff which was going on. So what we got now is a sort of hysterical demand by the media to, if anything, get this deal agreed, when of course they've been opposing everything up to this point in time. So it looks like they're trying to stampede MPs into agreeing something which actually would make Britain into a colony of the European Union, in my opinion. So a no-deal Brexit would be the best thing. But I'm not here to talk about politics. So we're going to get on with the rest. What I'm going to do today is arm you to fight the climate emergency false narrative. And once you've heard this, you won't need to hear the argument again, because you'll be able to convince anybody on the other side that man-made climate change does not exist. Okay, and here I'm going to explain that the CO2 story is really the ideological underpinning of a lot of globalist expansion for more control and more taxation. It's for redistribution of wealth upwards, not downwards. And we set up now a new activity to combat Extinction Rebellion, to make Extinction Rebellion extinct, and it's called Action for Life. Poster over there, and we point out that climate policy controls you, not climate. And we've been handing out a document here which we'll come to discuss later on, one sheet. Okay, so before we go any further, I'm just going to very briefly mention a bit about myself. Some of you know this already, but we need to go through it. So I've been active in the field of science since I was 7 years old, and I've had various published papers and so forth listed on here. And this is available online, so I needn't go through it. But one point worth mentioning, because we're in the north especially, is that I had these ideas for some ideas for making long-range forecasts based on solar activity a long time ago. And I was trying to work them out in 1981, 1982, 1983 and so on. But I gave up because I couldn't get anything that would work reliably. There were some signs of working, but it wasn't very good. So I gave up. Then the miners' strike came along in 1984, and some friends of mine said, "Oh, Piers, why don't you work out if it's going to be a cold winter for the miners?" I said, "Well, look, I don't know. And they said, "No, just go off, do it, man, do it." So I said, "All right." And I came back and said, yes, it actually is going to be a very cold winter, 84, 85, which it was. It wasn't cold enough for the miners because there were other factors going on. But because of that, I pressed on and made even more accurate weather forecasts long range. So we've got to thank the combination of Arthur Scargill and Margaret Thatcher for me being here. And here we have a T-shirt from the Women Against Pit Closures 1984. So I think you should applaud that. Whoa. There we are. Thank you. Whoa. It's all right. I think it's all right.
No, put it back.
It's not all right. Ah, okay. All right. Well, we did various things. We set up, in the past, set up Weather Action on the stock exchange. We since delisted, and I carry on with it as a off the stock exchange now, based in London Bridge area of London, and we do long range forecasts now for Britain and Ireland, Europe and the USA, and we will be able to do China soon, which will be very interesting. Okay, enough on all that stuff. Let's just move on. Now, what we're going to do here today is we're going to talk about what's happening in the weather and a bit of the politics. We're going to show you the science that man-made climate change doesn't exist, and you're going to get to accept and remember key points there. Man's CO2 is only 4% of the total, for example. And then we're going to talk about what really does affect the weather. And then we'll have a bit of the politics. We've only got 2 hours for this, so we're going to have a break after an hour, I'm informed. Okay, now then, here's the first thing about what's happening recently. This is the graph, and we've handed these out. And the upper graph is the graph which is put around by the IPCC of the United Nations, that is Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the European Union, BBC, everybody. They say temperatures have been pretty uniform for the last 1,000 years and they've suddenly gone up because of man's CO2. Well, even if what they said about temperatures is true, there's no proof that the temperatures have gone up because of man's CO2. Now, below is a graph of actual estimates, which is what the IPCC believed in 1990, but they obliterated what they believed because they wanted to make a false narrative. Now, their false narrative, the top graph, is now proven fraud, according to a court in Canada, because Tim Ball was taken to court by Michael Mann, the author of the graph above, and he said to Tim Ball, sorry, the other way around, because Michael Mann was told by Tim Ball that you should be in the state Penn, not in Penn State, and this was regarded as libel. So then Michael Mann was asked for to show in detail how he produced his graph, and he refused consistently from a number of appearances in court to do so. So the judge dismissed the case, awarded all costs against him, and told him he's not allowed even to appeal. So the hockey stick graph is now proven fraud, but this wasn't mentioned on the BBC. This should have been wall-to-wall coverage for a week. You know, it's of fundamental importance to the whole of the narrative. So there must be something going on for the truth not to be put forward. Okay, now we're going to flash through a few things about recent weather, just to sort of put you in the picture, get you to understand what is going on. This one, it's a picture of it's this year, what was happening in the end of end of June and early July. Yes, there's two things conflated there actually. And this is a situation we predicted from some months ahead with very warm Britain and Western Europe, and it was in fact quite cold in Russia. The BBC, of course, reported the cold bit. Did not report the cold bit. They reported the warm bit and made you think it was something dramatic going on. Interestingly, at that point, we also said when some new sunspots were going to appear, which they did when we said, and we predicted there would be more activity in the solar wind. And now the solar wind is this big rush of particles that comes from the sun at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and it impinges on the Earth's magnetic field. And when there's wobbles in it, you can measure geomagnetic activity, which is a measure of the particles coming from the sun in a way. And we also predict what we call extra activity in the weather, like more thunderstorms and more winds and so forth. And we call these Red 5, Red 4 and Red 3 periods. Now, we predicted those periods and they happened when we said, accompanied with extra activity in the solar wind. We say that just because, you see, that's nothing to do with CO2, and it is a way of proving our forecasts are solar connected. Now, late July, we had another bit of BBC hysteria. They said, oh yes, hottest ever, and they had this lower picture there of Cambridge, the biological garden in Cambridge, and said it had reached 38.6 degrees, which was a record, they said. Well, you see, there was a southeast wind blowing that day across New Build in other parts of Cambridge. It's all sprung up in the last 5 or 10 or 20 years. And obviously that's where the heat comes from, because a nearby weather station in Cambridge in countryside which had not been modified, the peak temperature was 36.1. So that would be the real measure. The point is they're looking around for any heat island which they can claim is something to do with mankind. And at the same time, you see on the upper graph, the upper picture, it was actually very cold in Russia, but they didn't tell you that. And there was also huge hailstorms happening in the Tour de France, the top right picture. I can point with this, of course. There we are. And later on in July, we had this super cold coming down into Russia and East Europe, which they didn't report. So what is going on? Well, what they're telling us is, oh yes, all this heat, this proves the CO2 story. But actually, the narrative they present disproves it. Because these wild changes, these wild heats, if you like, are due to the wild jet stream, i.e. the jet stream going, waving around a lot, so you get these temperature contrasts. The jet stream is this, obviously it's much more complicated than this, but it's west to east motion of air, upper air, and if you're going to have the British Isles hot, you'd have it going like this, so it'd be warmer there. It's warmer on the lower side of the jet stream and colder on the upper side. And if it goes down like this, then you would have cold blasts. And the situation we got in recent years is the jet stream has got more wavy and on average shifted south. But the big extremes of weather you have are always something to do with the jet stream moving around. Now, the BBC said, oh yes, the recent warmings have been more uniform than ever in the past. Well, actually, the adjustments they're doing of temperatures are much uniform. Nothing to do with reality. So the reason why it's more uniform is because they've increased the temperatures in parts of the world where it's been cold. So it's evidence of fraud.